So, welcome back to part 2 of gut problems in long COVID. As I said before, I'm Dr. Tim Robinson, formerly a family doctor for 30 years, now Long Covid Services for 5 years. I'm posting on podcast channels and YouTube. I hope you find them helpful. If you like them, click subscribe. I have to add my usual disclaimer. Any advice, treatment I mention should only be considered after discussion with your own doctor. So in part 1, I talked about gut problems in long COVID and their causes. Now here we are in part 2, and I will talk about how we're going to tackle them. Right, well, just to recap. The causes for gut problems in long COVID, well, there were 4 basically, weren't there? There was the mast cell activation. This is the both upper and lower bowel problems, the sort of the frequent motions and bloating and food intolerances. And then there was dysautonomia, that imbalance of the autonomic-automatic nervous system, bringing about nausea, but also those motility problems. And then there was autoimmunity, where our immune system attacks our own normal cells, not good, and that includes gut cells. And then gut dysbiosis. I talked about the sort of the friendly bacteria, didn't I? And so how important it is. And in long COVID, that balance has been found in research studies to be not so friendly. So first of all, mast cell activation. As I said, it's mostly in the lower bowel and those symptoms that I've just mentioned. So the treatment for this is really quite straightforward. It's basically with H1 and H2 receptor blockers. So H1, H2. What does H stand for? H stands for histamine. Okay, just recap briefly. Remember what mast cell activation is all about? It's releasing of these cells, these mast cells, of their components, their inflammatory, pro-inflammatory components, the majority of which is histamine. So the treatment, therefore, is an antihistamine, of course, isn't it? H1. And so there are a number of different antihistamines available, and we tend to favour and recommend H1 antihistamines that are second generation. And by that I mean these are not the original first generation antihistamines, such as Piriton, chlorphenamine, quite a mouthful, chlorphenamine, because we don't usually use those for histamine-related problems like hay fever, because they're quite sort of sedating. We tend to recommend and prescribe second generation, which are, for example, cetirizine or fexofenadine or loratadine, H1 receptor antagonists. There are H2 receptor antagonists. So these are anti-acid drugs. So we had cimetidine, and then we had ranitidine, and cimetidine had too many side effects, and it was 4 times a day drug, and it has side effects. Ranitidine basically ran into problems with an adverse effect to do with the liver. So that then led us to another in the class called famotidine. So famotidine H2 blocker. The dose of these is in the way they're used in mast cell activation is higher than is on the data sheet. But this is sort of the commonly used drug regime. So basically twice the recommended, or what the level is, what the milligram dose that is on the label of their respective boxes. So for example, cetirizine is on the box, it says 2 milligrams, 10 milligrams once a day. Well, we found that actually 10 milligrams twice a day is more effective. Some even increase it to 30, 40 milligrams a day, but that should not be done, I repeat, should not be done without the guidance and supervision of your GP. But dermatologists and immunologists are quite comfortable with those higher doses. But like I said, do not attempt this yourselves. Discuss this with your doctor. But certainly 10 milligrams twice a day of cetirizine, which is said to be the strongest of those three that I mentioned, is going to be safe. Famotidine, likewise, it's usually 20 milligrams. It's either 10 or 20 milligrams, but most people would prescribe 20 milligrams for its acid-lowering properties. On the box, it'll say 20 milligrams once a day, but again, in long COVID world and in MCAS, mast cell activation treatment, the majority of worldwide would be recommending twice a day. So that's H1 and H2 blockers, which really are the mainstay for treatment of mast cell activation. And, and again, my experience over these 5 years with long COVID patients, patients are so grateful for when I recommend it and they ask their doctor to prescribe it. So grateful because it reverses so many of those such troublesome symptoms, particularly the bowel symptoms. But it's always nice though, and I've heard this a number of times. Patients then say, actually, my bowel symptoms are so much better, but this is great, that actually my fatigue, my long COVID fatigue and my brain fog is not so troublesome either. So there's a sort of a happy end, or a happy ever after, happy ending, in that it's more than actually we are bargaining for, and for those other symptoms to be relieved as well. It's just lovely. So certainly worth considering a trial of those H1 and H2 blockers if you have any of those gut problems. I haven't mentioned the intolerances as well. Yes, and again, patients report back saying, do you know, I can now have bread again, or pasta, thanks to the H1 and H2 blockers. So certainly worth considering, Then there's ketotifen, which basically is a second generation antihistamine also, so H1 blocker. But its added bonus point in its favour is that it does have mast cell stabilizing properties. So not only is it addressing the histamine symptoms, but it's also making those mast cells less likely, less prone to what we call degranulate, to sort of fall apart and release their contents, because the mast cell wall is more stable and more resilient. So in a way you could say ketotifen has a bit of an edge over cetirizine and loratadine and fexofenadine. But try the others first. But remember, actually ketotifen could be taken in their place, along with the famotidine. So that's ketotifen. The next is chromoglycate. Okay, right. We've known and have prescribed chromoglycate for decades for patients with hay fever, but in the eye drop form. So patients with hay fever, who have itchy eyes or running eyes or red eyes with their hay fever, their symptoms, the eye symptoms, can be controlled with sodium chromoglycate eye drops. Dampens them down nicely, applied 4 times a day. Yes, You can get this chromoglycate in oral form. However, you probably won't be able to get it prescribed because it doesn't have a license for mast cell activation, and B, it's in GP land, it's not prescribed because it's extremely expensive. So we call it non-formulary. It's not on a GP formulary. So therefore, you're going to find it very difficult to source, which is a pity. However, I would actually say, as an aside, I think that H1 and H2 blockers will probably suffice anyway. And then the third treatment for mast cell activation is, it's not a drug, it's a supplement. It's basically derived from plants. It's something called quercetin, which is a polyphenol. So it is contained in lots of plants, and it has the property that ketotifen has of stabilizing the wall of the mast cell. Therefore, it reduces the susceptibility for the mast cell to release its inflammatory components. So I've got lots of patients who go and buy their quercetin from their health food shop and take it in conjunction with H1 and H2 blockers. I don't have any objection to that, as long as, as always, you stick to what it says on the label. But also just one other proviso, and that is anything herbal, you really ought to run past your doctor with regard to any potential interactions with other conventional medications that you might be taking. So if you're taking a medication, a herbal supplement can interfere with that conventional medication. It can either make it less bioavailable, so therefore, say, your blood pressure pills might not work so well, which is not good, so because your blood pressure will jump up. Or it might actually lead to increased availability of that drug. So the conventional drug, may become toxic level. So talk to your doctor before you have anything herbal, please. So, like I said, I'm tackling the various problems, the gut problems. So I've talked about MCAS, mast cell activation. What are the other problems? Do you remember? Well, first or second now is nausea. Nausea due to that element of dysautonomia. Nausea is well treated, and all GPs are familiar with the drugs that tackle nausea, and they are basically prochlorperazine, cyclizine, or ondansetron. So all of them are frequently prescribed for nausea, as long as the underlying cause is discovered. There is another antiemetic, anti-nausea tablet called metoclopramide, which in a way has sort of fallen out of favour. It's there to use if we need to resort to it. The other ones don't work. But metoclopramide is a drug that can cause something called an oculogyric crisis or extrapyramidal side effects. So we don't tend to like it. And those side effects are commoner in the younger population, like a lot of our long COVID patients are in that young category. So for nausea, due to dysautonomia, we'd be favouring prochlorperazine, cyclizine, and ondansetron. So that's nausea done. What about the diarrhea? Okay, well, like I said, diarrhea is part of the large intestinal problems or disturbed motility. And so diarrhea can be just treated symptomatically. I mean, ideally, I think that your diarrhea should first and foremost be hopefully dealt with by taking H1 and H2 blockers because of the underlying cause, the MCAS. But if they've not made a great improvement on that diarrhea, then we can just sort of dampen down the diarrhea by taking loperamide. Again, we're very familiar with this, and you actually buy it over the counter. So, that is, if you like, symptomatic treatment. It's not actually getting to the root cause, which mast cell activation treatment is. H1, H2 blockers is getting to the underlying cause. Whilst we're on the bowel, again, I've talked about irritable bowel syndrome. So those patients who have previously had irritable bowel syndrome, then they find with their long COVID that their IBS is worse, and they may find that their bloating is worse, and their semi-form motions are more frequent and troublesome. So there's no harm in trying, again, a symptomatic approach, and that is using mebeverine and peppermint oil. Again, us in GP land, we're all familiar with using those medications to ease those symptoms. And there's no harm using that in tandem with H1 and H2 blockers, just to bring some added symptom relief. And then finally, remember I said that inflammatory bowel disease can worsen with long COVID. And again, certainly this is our experience. Patients who've been diagnosed prior to COVID, pre-pandemic, and live with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, have found that since having COVID and now long COVID, their inflammatory bowel disease is worse. And basically, we should be advising those patients to ask for referral back to their specialist team who manage their inflammatory bowel disease. So those are the main ways we're going to tackle the gut problems that long COVID patients can have. There's another strategy there, of course. When we're thinking guts, we're thinking of what we put in our guts, our diet, our food, our nutrition. So what dietary advice should we be giving our long COVID patients who have these gut problems? So basically we need a diet that is full of, wait for it, prebiotic fiber. Prebiotic fiber, what is that? Why is that? Okay. So prebiotic fiber that's plant fiber, is a type of fiber that nourishes our gut microbiota, the bacteria in our large intestine, our microbiota. And like I said earlier, we know, studies have shown that the microbiota in the large colon is not normal. And frequent studies, many studies have demonstrated this. We use the word friendly bacteria. That's what we want in our large intestine. Well, it's less friendly in patients with long COVID. And this is not good news. Why? Again, I covered it briefly. The microbiota is important for so many reasons. First and foremost is supporting the body's immune system. So the majority of our immune system, our lymphatics, are along the gut, and the structures that support the gut, the mesenteries and the lymph glands, the mesenteric lymph glands that run the length of the gut. Majority, say 90-95% of the gut, of their body's immune system, runs along the gut. The microbiota is really important for stimulating and keeping the immune tissues activated and ticking over and sort of just humming over, just simmering. And so that if it's just sort of humming along and ticking over, it means that it's it's always primed, almost ready to face anything that shouldn't be there, an invading virus, an invading bacteria, or any toxin from outside. So it's already primed, ready to go. Microbiota, the friendly bacteria, do this. They keep the gut, friendly bacteria, primed. Another function, a really important function of a healthy microbiota, is the maintenance of the cells that line the gut, all 30 to 40 feet of the gut, the cells that actually line it. So those cells are nourished by the friendly bacteria. Why? Because the prebiotic fiber is broken down into short-chain fatty acids. Those short-chain fatty acids are a source of energy for the cells that line the gut. So, basically they bring the fuel for those cells to function normally and to act in a protective, defensive way, as well as do all the other things like secrete enzymes. So a healthy bacteria, a healthy lining that is well maintained with all that energy, means that those cells, if you like, stick together really tightly. The junctions between those cells, which are called the tight junctions, are tight. And therefore, if they're tight, they don't allow toxins from inside the gut tube into the bloodstream. If the gut lining, if the microbiota is not as good as it could be, then that can lead to leaky gut, leaking of toxins and what have you, and bacteria into the circulation. And then that fuels the inflammatory process of long COVID. That's not good. Other functions of the friendly bacteria are basically to bring about the production, the synthesis of vitamin K, and to help with the absorption of vitamin B12. Again, both essential because they're vitamins, they're essential amines, vital amines. They're essential for so many processes. Vitamin K for effective blood clotting, vitamin B for so many processes within cells, but also to prevent what we call is macrocytic anemia or pernicious anemia. So you need vitamin K, you need vitamin B12, and if you haven't got an efficiently friendly bacteria in your gut, then you're not going to get those to the levels that you need them. I talked earlier about neurotransmitters, those chemicals that actually help nerve transmission, and particularly in the brain. Serotonin. There are a couple of others, dopamine and GABA, but serotonin is the one. And remember what I said. Serotonin is really important for mood stabilization. When your serotonin levels are low, then you're more prone to disturbances of mood, and that can extend into depression. And then finally, there's the production of a hormone called melatonin. You may have heard of melatonin as a sleep enhancer. Well, melatonin is produced in the large intestine by the action of friendly bacteria on an amino acid called tryptophan, which is derived from our diet. So that brings about not only production of serotonin, but melatonin. Melatonin goes into the circulation, and that goes up into the brain and is concentrated in the pineal gland, right in the center, the core of the brain. That's a really important hormone. It has antioxidant, so anti-inflammatory properties, but it's also really important as our own homegrown, if you like, natural sedative that is there. And so therefore it enhances our sleep. It helps us get to sleep. It helps us stay and have good sleep, quality, refreshing sleep, which is what we all need, and particularly in those who have long COVID. We know all about the circadian rhythm and the day-night cycle, and melatonin is only released during the dark from the pineal gland. That's why it's a sleep enhancer. But it has this other function of being an antioxidant as well. So if your production of melatonin is poor because you haven't got friendly bacteria, that's your melatonin levels are going to go down. Your sleep's not going to be so good. There's going to be more inflammation. Not good. So the message is really clear. We need a healthy bacteria in our large intestine. And how do we get in a healthy bacteria? We feed them. We need to nourish them with, wait for it, back to prebiotic fiber. So what foods are prebiotic? Well, basically there's a class of what we call oligosaccharides, a class of naturally occurring plant fibers. And the particular class that have the majority of these oligosaccharides are the galacto-oligosaccharides. You may have heard of GOS and FOS. FOS is fructo-oligosaccharides. GOS is galacto-oligosaccharides. We need galacto-oligosaccharides. And the foods that have them plus are onions, leeks, garlic, artichoke, and banana. So eat those foods because they will nourish. That brings you prebiotic fiber, and that will nourish your friendly bacteria. Very, very important. So I've talked about how to increase our numbers naturally through nourishing them with food that our friendly bacteria really like, the onions, leeks, garlic, and bananas. But also there's another strategy to actually increase our friendly bacteria. That is to take them, if you like, artificially. We can as probiotics. Again, this is a health food supplement. Basically, a probiotic is a pill or a capsule full of microbiota, and typically the lactobacillus and the bifidobacter microbiota, which are the majority of our naturally occurring microbiota. So if you can top them up by munching them, by swallowing them down, then you're going to top up what you're slightly deficient in, if you like. And you can get these from, as I say, the health food shop. And, basically, if you look, there can be anything sort of 10 billion of those microbiota bacteria in a capsule, or anything up to 50 billion. We'd always advise start low, go slow. Why? Because too many bacteria initially can stir it all up too quickly. It can be too aggressive. So just pick one that is sort of like 10 billion per capsule. Then you can graduate up. You can get them at the 20 and the 30 and the 50. You may not need to go up to the 50. Your symptoms may improve along with those other measures anyway. So, that's what you can do to top up those friendly bacteria. So I've talked about the diet, and what I'm saying is, you need a diet with lots of prebiotic in it, don't you? Prebiotic fiber. In this whole topic of gut problems in long COVID and mast cell activation being the commonest underlying cause for your gut problems, you may well have come across the low histamine diet. Okay. Remembering, just a quick recap, mast cell activation is to do with release of those inflammatory components from the mast cells, and the biggest component of which is histamine. So too much histamine, not a good thing, because it brings about a lot of those long COVID gut symptoms. Okay, so think to yourself, okay, right, we've got to reduce the histamine. And then you may well be aware that there's quite a lot of histamine knocking around in quite a few of our foods that we eat on a daily basis. And hard cheeses, for example, those older hard cheeses, the Stiltons and the ones with bits of blue in it, contain quite a lot of histamine. So do smoked meats. So, cured ham, for example. Tinned fish, likewise. And then oranges and bananas and spinach and tomatoes, those sort of so-called really healthy foods, those the rainbow foods. Fruit and veg. Wine and beer contain histamine. Peanuts and tree nuts, also contain histamine. So there's quite a lot of, your normal average diet, everyday diet that contains histamine. So you think to yourself, okay, well, this is not good. If I've already got mast cell activation that's bringing about excessive histamine knocking around, bringing symptoms, I'm actually adding to the problem by eating all these things, these cheeses and meats and tomatoes and bananas and spinach. This is not good. So what are we going to do about it? Well, what can we do about it? Well, we can reduce those histamine foods. This is called a low histamine diet. It's an elimination diet, basically. And so many of those foods are off the list. Unfortunately, many of those foods, well, all of them that I've listed, certainly, have very important functions. So there's protein. There's protein in cheese and nuts and meats, isn't there? We need protein for repair of cellular damage and growth. Those foods contain vitamins and anti-inflammatory chemicals, antioxidants. Again, vitamins are needed for, a lot of the normal cellular processes and cell renewal, etc., etc. But antioxidants, we need antioxidants to dampen down the inflammation of long COVID. And then there's minerals, calcium and magnesium and iodine and selenium, copper. All these minerals, both the major trace elements, but also the full-blown elements, the ions and the calciums and magnesiums. They're all contained in a lot of those foods. So if you are on a low histamine diet, you're actually depriving yourself of all those components, which are necessary for cell repair, immune support, and healing. So, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Low histamine diet, reduces histamine, therefore theoretically reduces your histamine response, mast cell activation response. But, you're damned if you do go on a low histamine diet, because, you lose all the functions of all those foods that really are very important for all those functions. And then I turn to the British Dietetic Association. What do they think? Basically the dietitians governing body, if you like. It's the dietitians sort of advisory board, if you like, and looked at their website, and basically their recommendation for low histamine in diet and long COVID was that actually it shouldn't be recommended, should not be recommended. What they would prefer would be a mixed balanced diet, a Mediterranean style diet. Interesting. So if the BDA are saying that, I take note of that. So I would go to a mixed balanced diet, a Mediterranean diet. The other thing that you might have come across is DAO. So that stands for diamine oxidase. That is a chemical that breaks down histamine, which sounds logical, doesn't it? It's a chemical that naturally occurs in all of us, and it's made in the liver. So, if it's made, and what does it do? Its function is to break down histamine. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense, actually, logically. Okay, well, if I had some more of that, I'd break down lots more histamine, wouldn't I? Yeah. Well, actually, it doesn't seem to work like that, or the effect that it has is so minimal that it's probably not worth taking. So we, in the long COVID world, do discourage that diamine oxidase for those reasons. So note of those, but what about yes to quercetin? I talked about quercetin earlier, didn't I, for mast cell activation, and the fact that it is a polyphenol. So which is a fancy word for basically a bioactive nutrient that is contained naturally in fruit and veg. And I talked about it earlier because of its mast cell stabilizing properties, which is great because therefore it prevents mast cells degranulating, falling apart, and releasing their contents. But also it's a antioxidant as well. So naturally occurring in the skin of pears and apples, and red fruit, and and plums and apricots. So that's obviously really helpful. Strictly speaking, a low histamine diet would exclude quercetin. I'm saying include it. But I also mentioned what the BDA suggested, and that's sort of a mixed balance diet, the Mediterranean diet. And, I will keep going on about the Mediterranean diet because, a mixed balance diet. Mixed, and it's got all the macronutrients, the correct balance of all those macronutrients, the fats, the healthy fats, and the carbohydrate and the protein. It's not one of these diets, it's high fat, low carb, etc., ketogenic or paleolithic diet. No, it's a mixed balanced diet, Mediterranean diet. It's got the rainbow of all the colours of the fruit and veg, because each of them have a different colour for a reason. They're each a different colour because they have a different polyphenol in it, antioxidant in it, which mops up those free radicals. So it's really important to have a mixed balanced diet with the rainbow. Eat the rainbow, they say. So there we have it. That's the additional way to be tackling our long COVID gut problems. So really, just to sum up, I think first thing I'm going to say is safety first. So if you've got a new problem to do with your gut, okay, take it to your doctor. It's a new problem. It's a medical health problem. Take it to your doctor. Don't be COVID blind. Don't say to yourself, well, it's happened since I've had COVID. It might be, but then again, it might not be. It might be just happening coincidentally. So therefore, don't be COVID blind. Run it past your doctor first. If it turns out just to do with long COVID, fine. We can proceed along the lines that I've said. But let's think safety first. I talked about the causes. Okay, and I think it's so important. As we know, long COVID is a multi-causal, multi-symptom, multi-system illness. And it's really important to understand the causes for lots of reasons. First of all, understanding it in a way brings you validation that if we know the causes, we can measure those causes, and research backs up those causes, then you can say to someone who's sort of maybe doubting your long COVID, say, look, yes, it is a real thing. I've been unlucky. I've had COVID. It's given me long COVID, and I've got these, if you like, it's an injury. I've got this damage, and we can prove it with blood tests and scans and what have you. All that is actually quite important for your own acceptance as well. If you understand what you've got, you're halfway there, aren't you? You can put it down. You can think to yourself, okay, well, I've got this. That's the long COVID, which is really important. And acceptance is half the way to moving on and not fighting the problem. We've talked about the commonest sort of problems or the underlying causes, and the commonest cause is mast cell activation, and I've talked about the treatments. If you want to know more about mast cell activation, I've given you a lot, but there is a lot more, unfortunately, of course. Listen to the podcast on mast cell activation. And I've talked about the Mediterranean diet, the mixed balance diet, for that prebiotic fibre. I'll say it again. Never miss a chance to not slide in the prebiotic fibre, but all those other reasons to help the microbiota. But equally, yes, I've focused really on gut, but, remember, we've got to view the whole recovery as sort of a package. Okay, so we mustn't forget those other things we talk about in our long COVID recovery, the strategies. So strategies, the 3 Ps, the planning, the prioritizing, and the pacing, really important at the same time. And the sort of reconditioning of the muscles and the tendons and ligament by sort of gentle activity, okay, within your energy envelope. So gentle activity, say stretches with yoga, say. And yoga's good because it's actually, it's sort of you're focusing on that time you're doing yoga, which is really important. And it's sort of like akin to the mindfulness that actually, which is focus on the now, okay? And there are lots of studies that show that yoga and mindfulness are not all in the mind and not all woo-woo. No, studies that show that they have an effect on the body and healing. And sleep is another strategy that we must not forget. We must focus on sleep hygiene. It's really important to aid our recovery in long COVID. So there it is, the update on gut problems in long COVID. I hope you found them helpful. As I said at the start, this is an educational series for you long COVID sufferers. But remember my usual disclaimer. Any advice or treatments I've mentioned, please discuss with your doctor. Remember, safety first. So, if you find it helpful, click subscribe. Let's spread the word, get it out there to as many of you poor long COVID sufferers as possible. Thanks for the feedback from my podcasts and YouTube postings. Thanks for them. I really appreciate that you've taken the time to feedback to me, and I read them all. I apologize. I can't respond to everyone. I get so many, but I do appreciate them because they really help me with my future posts. So there we are. Let's watch out for the next one. So in the meantime, I wish you well in your long COVID recovery. So all the best to you.